In this video, I'll show you how I fit stone arrowheads to my hunting arrows to make primitive hunting gear actually suitable to take big game. I've got only a couple arrows in my quiver right now. I made this quiver in a recent video. It's made from a road-killed raccoon. This leather is the skin of a deer. It's brain-tanned buckskin, the first buckskin hide I ever tanned. This quiver holds my short bow arrows. With a shorter bow, you need shorter arrows, but this arrowhead would have been just as suitable for a full-length arrow on a longbow. Got some nice serrations on the side. It was a tough stone to knap, so I didn't get it quite as thin as I'd like, but I got it just thin enough that I'm comfortable using this. I'll probably use this arrow for hunting rabbits and other small game, and that's because this arrowhead doesn't match the size regulations needed for deer hunting in Idaho. Most of the work we're doing here is done with a knife. A good fixed blade knife is a good tool to have. To start out, I have this finished arrow shaft. It's fletched and everything. This is a functional arrow. It just doesn't have a point. So to get things started here, I flattened two sides of the last inch or so of the arrow, tapering it to kind of a flathead screwdriver shape. You can see here what I mean by that. With that flathead screwdriver shape created, now we start notching out the front. We're creating the spot for the arrowhead to seat into the arrow. This is much easier done with a saw. A couple of hacksaw blades can be fitted together in hand and used to make a wide notch that will accept an arrowhead. But instead, I'm showing you how to do this with just a knife. So you're going to very carefully carve towards yourself. I know you've been told never carve towards yourself. That's against all knife safety rules. It's not against all of them, it's against the beginner rules. When you get into more advanced carving techniques, sometimes you have to carve towards yourself in a very controlled fashion, and you can do this safely. As you can see here, I'm using my thumb as an anchor point, just squeezing my palm towards my thumb. I'm not using my elbow. My arm muscles aren't pulling the knife towards me where it could slip and I have less control of it. By having your thumb as an anchor, squeezing the knife towards yourself, you create a much safer scenario for carving and scooping out bits of wood towards yourself in a way where it's not going to slip and impale you. Once a shallow notch is started, then we need to start scooping out material on the sides. For this particular arrowhead, we have to make a pretty wide channel for it to fit in. You can see I change how I hold the knife here so I can start scoring the side of the arrow shaft with the tip of the knife blade at a bit of an angle, still keeping everything anchored between my hands. And you can see I'm using this pinch grip on the blade. There's a couple variations of this grip. Some of them even go towards your palm. But as long as you're holding the blade between the pads of your fingers, doing controlled cuts anchored in your hands, there's little risk of it slipping and cutting the inside of your hand. The key is to move slow. Don't be in a rush. Don't use too much pressure either. Use a very sharp knife because sharp knives slip less than dull knives. With that knife tip, you can start scooping out material on the edges just by rotating the wrist and applying pressure with the thumb. Rotate the arrow shaft around to work the other side as well. Work this channel deeper and deeper, actually scooping out material. Eventually you work out enough material that you can change the orientation of the knife and face it away from you, having a safer plane of carving now, and work at the bottom of that notch, carving pieces out towards the tip. All of this takes finesse and great care, so please be careful. You can see that there's four sides that I really carve against here. Because the knife blade is so wide, I can't just insert it all the way and scoop out a bunch of material. I'm just working with the tip of the knife. There's the right side of the arrow shaft and the top and bottom of the right side that I carve against. And then there's the left side, top and bottom as well. So keep track of where you've carved already, watch everything, and make sure you're keeping it all even. You don't want the arrowhead skewing off to one side because you scooped out more material on that side. Feather that material out to the tips because you want a seamless transition on that arrowhead as well. The wood should transition to arrowhead without leaving a big bump. And we'll be able to feather out tips on the outside too. Once it looks like you're getting close, you can dry fit the arrowhead and see how it's looking. Here I can see that this arrowhead is a little too chunky to fit into that groove very well. And this is one reason why it's important that flint knappers learn how to make really thin arrowheads. They fit better in the arrow shafts and make more seamless transitions. That equates to more penetration on the animal you hunt, which holds more potential for a humane kill and not just an injury. Since that notch isn't quite to my liking, I get back in there, scoop out more material. You can see as this notch gets wider, it gets easier for me to maneuver the knife in there. In the absence of a good knife, I use a stone flake for this. A sharp piece of obsidian or agate which there's a lot of here in South Idaho, acts as a great multi-tool or pinch knife that you can hold between the pads of your fingers and maneuver just like I'm using this knife tip. One thing that's very likely to happen, especially with your first dozen or 2 dozen arrows, is splitting the arrow shaft a little bit beyond the notch for hafting the arrowhead. Here you can see that split happening, and it's not a big deal because we're going to glue this arrowhead in and bind that shaft with sinew. Sinew is an incredible binding material because it glues itself down and it tightens as it dries. And reinforcing that arrow shaft further is glue in the front adhering the tip to the base of that notch. Now is a good time to taper the whole front end of the arrow, starting about 3 inches back. Also use this as a time to feather out the tip of the arrow on either side of the notch. You want the transition between arrowhead and arrow shaft to be really smooth, so feather it out so there's no ledge. Now to get rid of all my carving lines, I use my knife as a scraper, just holding it 90 degrees to the arrow shaft, quickly and gently scraping it along. It smooths out the wood really nicely, makes it almost look like it was sanded to shape. Now that I've made the notch wide enough for the arrowhead, I'm going to reinforce that crack with some sinew. Sinew is a thread-like material. It comes from the tendons of animals. Tendons are comprised of very strong, elastic, extremely durable fibers of collagen, and you can click the link on the screen to see my short on how to make sinew. To use this sinew, first you need to rehydrate it, and the very best way to rehydrate sinew is by chewing on it. By chewing on it, saliva rehydrates it. The agitation of the teeth actually gets it to hydrate much faster. You don't have to do it this way. You can just put it in warm water and it will rehydrate just as well. It seems to have slightly better self-gluing effects if you chew on it though. Usually takes between 30 seconds and a couple of minutes for it to fully rehydrate, depends on how thick of a piece you're chewing. Then you can pull it out and simply wrap the shaft of the arrow. Pin down the start of your sinew wrap with your thumb and be sure to wrap over that start so it holds itself down. This way you don't need to tie a knot or anything. When you finish out the wrap, simply lay that sinew flat. You want thin pieces for this. It's better to use a couple of thin pieces than one thick piece. Thin pieces adhere themselves to the arrow shaft much better. That's going to dry within a couple of hours. And with that reinforced, now we're ready to put the arrowhead on. To do that, we need to get some glue in that notch. This ball of pine pitch glue on a stick has softened up in my garage and actually completely melted, with the temperature being just low enough that it didn't adhere to my workbench. But now it's pancaked out and looks a bit like a hockey stick. The glue works all the same though, and shy of cooking in a garage that's over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, it's very secure. To make this glue malleable so I can fit it in the notch here, I'm going to use a primitive Bic lighter. It's a tool I use out of convenience, but when I'm going full primitive with this, I make a small fire and wait for it to burn down to a few coals, and I'll warm up the glue over the coals. Because the glue is black, it absorbs heat really efficiently, so it's pretty quick to melt it. Soften it up with that flame and use that arrow shaft to scoop it into the notch. With it now in the notch, it's cooling down rapidly. We're going to heat up the arrowhead so that when I fit the arrowhead into that softened glue, it's not going to cold shock it and solidify the glue without adhering to the arrowhead. So warm up the arrowhead, and then you'll have to re-warm the glue in that notch. Once the glue is all softened up and that arrowhead is warm, carefully fit that arrowhead in all the way to the base of the notch. That's really important. Don't burn yourself, and if you want the glue to not stick to your thumb, lick your thumb first, because this glue repels water. This will allow you to smear the glue out of the way if you use too much as well. You want the impact of the arrowhead to be transferred into the shaft, not into the glue. Wipe away any excess and make sure the arrowhead's nice and straight. You can twirl it against your hand to make sure it's straight. While it's still soft, make any adjustments needed, and then you can let it cool down all the way, solidify up, and then we'll wrap the whole thing with sinew. This arrowhead is a notchless variety, but some arrowheads have notches. They're wrapped in a similar way, just without a notch, you just wrap the base of the arrowhead. Either way, start your sinew wrap underneath the arrowhead on the arrow shaft. Work your way upwards, going around the base of the arrowhead a few times, and then work your way back down the shaft until it runs out. If you want to be extra secure, you can use another piece of sinew and continue that wrap further down the shaft. That sinew helps prevent the arrow shaft from being split out by a hard impact too. Now, it's essentially done. If you want to take things a step further, you can use a little bit of wood glue or hide glue. Hide glue is traditionally used, and just smear a little bit over all those sinew wrappings down the arrow shaft a bit. That'll make sure the end of the sinew doesn't lift up. And if you use certain wood glues, it'll actually give it a waterproof layer. In a pinch, you can also use pine sap that's been melted down to a clear liquid, but not so hot that it's going to burn the sinew. Wood glue or hide glue work a lot better for this though, they're just not quite as waterproof. At this point, you can place that arrow back in your quiver and let that sinew cure. It'll take a few hours to even a couple days to dry out, depending on your environment. Here in South Idaho, we're having a rare, humid, cool day in the middle of July. It's overcast, it's beautiful. Usually it's around 95 to 100 degrees with less than 25% humidity. So when the weather here is typical, sinew cures for me within the day easily. Though we're using a modern steel knife for all of this, this is essentially how arrows were made for thousands of years. And they were made this way because it really works. It works really well. You can still primitive hunt today in many places on Earth. Weapons like this, shot from a powerful bow, are every bit as humane as modern steel-tipped arrows. So for me, this is much more than just a survival skill. This is a lifestyle thing for me. I want to become very proficient at primitive hunting. As of yet, I have not taken an animal with a stone-tipped arrow, but I've been working towards that goal for a long time, and I feel my skill is getting there, and that's why I finally made this video. This arrowhead was made a few years ago. My skill has greatly improved since then, and even so, this is a pretty good arrowhead. This year, I'm dialing in my primitive archery equipment, carving a new bow, and making a bunch of new arrows, and I plan to take a deer. We'll see if that actually happens or not. So be sure to subscribe so you'll see notifications about that, and I'll do a whole series about preserving the meat, tanning the hide, even going as far as making tools from the bones. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.